that will better ensure that all children grow up in families, children and youth, rather than in congregate care settings or other not so great outcomes. Today we have with us Gail Johnson Vaughn, and she is the Executive Director of Mission Focused Solutions. That's an independent nonprofit advocacy organization, and they provide strategies and solutions to child welfare organizations wishing to increase placement stability and improve permanency outcomes for children in foster care. I first met Gail when she was the Executive Director at Sierra Forever Families. She has been a longtime friend and mentor and colleague, has a lot to offer us all. And working with her is Jeff Landry, who is a retired executive from Hewlett-Packard and has started a second career in the nonprofit sector. He is the Deputy Director of Mission Focused Solutions. For those of you who are on the line, you're going to get a link to the slides, a recording, and an evaluation in a follow-up email, and we really hope that you will take the time. It's not a very long evaluation, but I'm hoping you'll take the time to fill it out for us so that we will know what we're doing right and where we can improve. Gail, if you can go to the second slide, that would be great.
Okay. Of course, it's not wanting to go. There it is.
Perfect. So just so that you know a little bit about how these work, you're going to be able to see the webinar slides. You will not be able to advance them. That will be Gail and Jeff that are doing that. I want to make sure that folks are muted, please. And if you have any questions, just type them into the question box at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel and click send. Gail, would you prefer that we stop now and again if we have questions, or would you rather hold questions till the end?
We want to hold them to the end. The material is fairly complex, and we want to make sure that we get through everything.
Perfect. Thank you for letting me know that. So I think I'm going to just go ahead and mute myself, and I will come back later, and in the meantime be enjoying this presentation with the rest of you.
Okay. So welcome everyone. I'm really pleased that so many of you are interested in this work. I want to start out with just some overviews, and first the whole concept, what you see is matters. We started with an optical illusion, and I'm wondering how many of you saw a vase? Could you say yes if you saw a vase? Or, okay, so you're all muted, that's okay. Or if they're faces. So this is an optical illusion where there's both two faces and a vase there, and depending on how you look at it is what you see. The importance of this is that the work around understanding how this funding methodology works is to know that it's not what's there, it's what you see that matters. So many times we see that our jurisdictions are saving tremendous amount of money by moving our children and youth into permanent families compared to the very high cost of keeping kids in foster care. But they just don't see that. And so that's why we call it hidden in plain sight. So we're going to be talking about that throughout our time, of how you make these incredible savings that are achieved by doing what's right for the children visible to the people that make the decisions in your jurisdiction. The second is the context with what we're looking at with our magnifying glass here. We all know, that all of us that work in child welfare, how much money could be saved by prevention and all kinds of things. The fundamentals that we're talking about today could apply in a lot of places, but we're specifically looking at the context of reinvesting savings achieved through specialized youth permanency services and family finding. That's the scope that we'll be talking about today, but it can be applied other places. And then the magic wand is really the shiny object. What's actually happening when we hit that big fiscal crisis, all of a sudden people started looking at ways to maximize the resources and cut costs. So we got their attention right there because we all know how much money we save. We know it's there. Now they were paying attention for the first time. And then we're also going to talk about strategy. What are the incentives and leverage points and other strategies that you could use in your jurisdiction to adopt this kind of methodology? So let's get into it. So we're calling this hidden in plain sight. You see our little Dalmatian friend here, and you have to look a little bit to find him, but he's there, and that's the very same. The funding for these kinds of services are self-perpetuating, and we're going to be talking about how that works. When we hit the big fiscal crisis, I'm sure a lot of you experienced jurisdictions trying to cut spending in order to reduce cost. But cutting spending often does not, in fact, reduce costs. What happens is that it drives costs up. So, for instance, in Sacramento County, they wanted to save money by closing the medical clinics, the indigent medical clinics. But what happened instead is that it drove up the cost of increased emergency room usage. They tried to do the same thing in child welfare in many jurisdictions, probably yours as well. For instance, so they cut child welfare costs, but what happens? They have fewer workers, they don't have their private partners, they're cutting contracts, and so the kids end up staying longer, they end up moving more, they have poor permanency outcomes, and so the costs are just going up and up and up. So the way to reduce costs is to remove children from expensive foster care, and the examples we have here are California, but we've crunched the numbers in 5 states so far, and it's something that can be done in every state. So for example, in California, children age 12 and up in a California group home, and in California we have different levels, so a lot of our teens are in either a level 12 or level 14. It costs $104,000 to keep a California youth in a level 14 group home every single year. Or if they're in a private agency, we call them foster family agencies in California, home, it's $23,000 every year that the child remains in care. So compare that now to the cost of keeping a child in a permanent family. A typical California adoption subsidy is about $9,800 a year for a teen. And that's kind of a generous one, but when we have crunched the numbers, we always try to use really believable numbers. We don't want them to be saying, oh yeah, that's not a high enough subsidy, that's not really what it costs. So all of our subsidy numbers we do pretty generously. So if you compare that, the annual savings, if a child is adopted from a group home level 12 at $104,000 a year, and instead they're now paying $9,800 a year, that's $94,744 every single year that is being saved on that child. That's a lot of money. You could pay for a lot of services with that. You could pay for youth permanency services to make sure more do it. And if the child is coming from a private agency foster care home, $23,000, and then you're paying the $9,800, you're still saving $13,710 for every year that the youth would have remained in care. That's a lot of money. So I'm going to pass this over to Jeff now to talk a little bit about how all of this methodology works.
Okay, thank you, Gail. It's interesting, we're talking about venture capitalists, and from an industry perspective, venture capitalists, it goes to the old saying, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So it's about an investment and an expected return on that investment. And so when a venture capitalist looks at making an investment in an organization, they're expecting a return. They're typically not expecting a return immediately because they know that there's a lot of things that have to happen in order to get into production, if you will. And it's about building the infrastructure and doing some R&D, doing marketing, building that process up to where eventually it starts turning a profit. And obviously, the sooner it turns a profit, the happier they are. So anyway, but the idea is, how do you invest and then expect a return, which a lot of times, potentially in government operations or in nonprofits, we don't expect to see a return because we're not thinking of profit. But in this case, it's a return on that investment. So go ahead, Gail, to the next one. So I'm going to talk briefly about the cost of care. And it's driven primarily by 2 or 3 factors. Obviously, the type of placement that the child goes into, whether it's a group home or an extended care facility of some type with different levels of care, it can be fairly expensive depending on the needs of the child. The age of the child is important because when we look at the costs, a younger child may be slightly less expensive. A lot of jurisdictions have a scale that provides for more cost the older the child gets because of expected higher needs and that sort of thing. But it also plays into when we're calculating the costs and savings because we calculate the time of from when they get permanency out to when they're 18, and that's where you do the calculation of savings. So if it's a younger child, it may be less expensive per month, but the period of permanency when you calculate the savings is longer out until they're 18, and then that's the time in care. So how long do you keep them in care? And the older teenagers, which may be viewed as difficult to place, their costs are pretty high, and so you look at that, and then you can calculate out to again their 18th birthday, and figure out how much you've saved once you get permanence. And so all those things are really the drivers of how we calculate the costs and the savings. The next one. There we go. So the other thing is looking at, and as Gail mentioned, we've done several states and lots of counties, and we have yet to ever see an exception to this because although some are state-run, some are county-run, the funding streams are slightly different, the cost factors are slightly different, but in the end, the best outcomes, permanency, adoption, reunification, and guardianship, those are typically all lower cost than the cost of foster care and the different levels of foster care. So that's kind of a basic assumption that we make, and we've never seen an exception to this yet. So go to the next one.
Can I just add one little thing to that, Jeff, if you don't mind?
Sure.
There's a couple of things that you think about, too, because, as you know, with adoption has been federal eligibility has been delinked from the old AFDC 1996 look back. So not only do you have a lower cost, that the subsidies are lower than paying an agency's part in all of this stuff, but you also have a lower cost, and you have a lower share of cost as well because more kids are federally eligible for it, and I think that's a useful thing. So it's the savings compound in that way.
That's a good point. Thank you, Gail. So we look at who saves, and again, this is an example from California, but it applies to every state we've looked at, whether it's county run or state run. And as Gail mentioned, you've got the foster care cost, and you've got an adoption subsidy, which is typically less on average, and you get an annual savings from that. And as Gail said, the permanency incentives that are built into the system at the federal level shift costs from the state and county up to the federal level when you reach permanency. So not only do you have a lower adoption subsidy or guardianship or whichever case you're talking about, you also have a higher participation from the federal government when you talk about permanency. So it compounds, and the savings is always there. We've never, like I said, never seen an exception yet.
And I would just throw in, when you see the 100% FFP next to the adoption subsidy, FFP is federal financial participation.
Great.
All right.
So here's some, we took some examples out of California and looked at some specific cases, and these are real numbers from real cases, and these are some older youth that people look at as difficult to place or adopt. And with a lot of things that were in this program, and Gail can talk more about that, but it's really more about, they're going to find kids, permanent families, and it's all possible. In other words, they can always do it. They work really hard at it, and they figure it out. So if you take Mary, she's almost 14 years old. If you take the savings, which is really the cost of placement less the cost of permanence subsidy, so you compare those two costs from when they reach permanence out through 18. Had they stayed in care, they wouldn't have seen the savings, but once they reach permanence, then you can see the county savings was $32,000 and the state saved $17,000. Obviously,
Every single year.
yeah, every single year. So you multiply that by the number of years from once they reach permanency out through 18, and it's considerable. And the same thing for Selene. These are different cases. They had different levels of care, and Alicia. And so you can see what that looks like. Now, if you multiply that by, say, 10 or 15 children, the savings are really get large. Okay?
Yep. Okay. And I want to make one comment right here. A lot of times when you're talking about achieving savings in a human services context, they'll fight back and say, well, maybe they would have gotten a permanent family anyway, or I'm not sure that's making a difference. But in the particular case of these adolescents who've been in foster care for a long time, we know that they're going nowhere fast. That really, without these specialized services that Kim has been involved with and a lot of us around the country have been involved with, that it's not going to happen without a really focused youth permanency kinds of things. So they don't argue about it as much. It's a big deal. So go ahead. We've broken out the county savings and the state savings here because as we were looking at who saves just a minute ago, I'm going to go up to that. If you go back to who saves, if you look there, you see when you're doing your advocacy and saying who are we going to approach to reinvest savings, you want to look at where the savings happen. So on the county there, you see there's a total of $13,000 that was saved in this particular case. The county saved $8,000 of it. The state saved $2,000, and the feds saved $3,600 of it. So the county that you're closest to, actually, if you're in a county-run state, that's the place you go to, because those dollars, those are general fund dollars that will revert to fill potholes or whatever they want to. But if they're reinvesting it here into these kinds of services, they'll have lots more money to put into potholes because they save so much for every youth.
I think another comment, Gail, that you mentioned, and that is when you talk about savings, and Gail mentioned that sometimes people will say, gee, they would have gotten permanency anyway. Well, maybe so, but you need to capture the savings from permanency because you're talking about the potential capacity you have to do this. And all of us have jurisdictions that have a certain amount of capacity to handle the cases they have, and I think if you ask them, they would always like to have more help because you can't make this happen fast enough. And I think as we talk about this reinvestment concept, they can increase capacity, whether it's through partnerships or in their own organizations. And there's a way to do that by looking at these savings.
And as we move through the slides, we're going to show you exactly how it worked in one particular jurisdiction and how you can come out. The money that they invested, the return on investment was 126% return on investment short-term and 180 by the time the kids were 18. So they had lots of extra money that they could use for whatever they wanted, including building the program. So we think about that venture capitalist, the VC, and he's going, well, it costs a lot of money to keep kids in foster care. Maybe I'll invest to get them out. And we kind of came up with this analogy with venture capital because I have a major funder whose money came through venture capital. And so I started pitching things to them in terms of, instead of venture capital, of venture philanthropy or philanthropic equity. And your funders want to have an impact, and their return on investment, if it's a funder, is better outcomes. If it's the county, then their return on investment is actually dollars, just like a venture capitalist. So enter the youth permanency movement. Okay, any of you who've been involved in this know that back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, a movement began where we began looking at, well, who says these kids can't get permanent families? That's a barrier belief, and we just don't believe it. And we started doing it all across the country and in little innovative programs, federal grants, and all the rest. And we really began to see that we could demonstrate that it happens. So we challenged prevailing beliefs like teens don't want parents, or potential parents don't want teens, and the apple doesn't fall from the tree, that you don't want to talk to their relatives, or kids will be disappointed because they won't be able to get a family, so we don't want to include kids, we don't want to refer kids in, or the youth is too unstable to move into a stable family. That's one of my favorites that I hear all the time. So we really challenged that, and we demonstrated that in fact we could find families for these youth. And we changed organizational culture. That was a really big deal. We discovered that doing this work is really whatever it takes. You got to do whatever it takes. So it doesn't necessarily fit into a regular 9-to-5 agency kind of model. You've got to use non-traditional hours. You need to be available to meet with the potential families, extended families, family finding, all of the rest when that works for them. You need absolutely to involve the youth. They need to be in the center of all of this. You need to be doing grief work with them. And the fact that finding a permanent family is everybody's job. It's not just for a particular unit or whatever. Everyone should be involved in this kind of work. So California actually was very fortunate to have a whole lot of venture capital or philanthropic equity happening to establish youth permanency programs. There were 7 youth permanency models that were funded in California, receiving a total of $30 million in startup capital. There were 2 federal grants. There were 5 older youth adoption contracts funded by the state to make this happen. And when I was at Sierra Forever Families, I was one of the federal grantees, and we had actually put into our proposal to the feds when they asked that question about what's the future funding, which, if we're honest, we all make up every time. In this case, we knew that there was future funding because of the savings we knew would happen, and we got our counties to agree to commit to seek permission from the Board of Supervisors to track and reinvest the savings. So I was doing that in our counties, but these other 7, the other 6 were not. So what happened was, the VC is saying, where's my return on investment? And our project got a commitment to allow it to continue. The others didn't, and when the funding sunset, all of those programs went back to business as usual or closed down altogether, reassigned staff, and all of the startup effort that they'd done for 3 to 5 years was lost. So in Sacramento and Nevada counties where the federal grant was, 86% of the youth served achieved permanence. Some of them achieved legal permanence through adoption, guardianship, or reunification, and we coined the term second chance reunification because we were discovering that some of these kids had been in care for 10 or more years. Their parents were in a really different place. They had different needs, and they're actually able to successfully reunify. And there's huge return in investment for that because there's no subsidy that goes with that either. So, and some of them were relational permanence. And I'm
Yeah, I think we lost you.
Gail? Jeff, can you hop in for a bit?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I can't control the slides, though. I'm not sure she can hear us at this point.
I'll try and reach her on my other phone.
Yeah, I can call her real quick, too.
Our chat.
Can you hear now?
Oh,
Yeah,
now
there
we
you go.
can. Great.
Okay, I must have bumped the mute. Did I stop mid-sentence?
Yes, you did.
You
Okay,
did.
all right. Sorry about that, folks. I'm not a high techie. All right. So 86% of the kids achieve permanent families. Some of them legal permanence, some of them relational permanence. These kids are doing well. And the project documented the savings throughout the 5-year period so that we could show exactly how much money had been saved. And these examples here are based on the 2010 sharing ratios. By sharing ratios, I mean what percentage did the county pay, what percentage did the state pay, and what percentage did the feds pay. Those of you on the webinar who are from California know that we have something called realignment now, and it kind of confuses things. I'm not going to be talking about that because we don't need the whole country to be confused like we are, but we have figured it out here. Okay, so we asked permission to reinvest. We went to the Board of Supervisors. We had worked with them throughout the 5 years, telling them what was happening, getting them excited about the fact that these kids were actually achieving permanent families, sharing vignettes with them at the same time that we are showing them the savings that are happening. The savings reverted to the general fund. They were leveraged and reinvested, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the leveraging and how that worked in a few more slides. But we found a way to pay for the services using less local funds and more federal funds, and I'll talk about that. So it was actually reinvested. They said, okay, here's the money you saved, we're going to give it back. The project still continues 6 years after the sunset of the federal funds, and at no net cost to the county at all. So it was started, and it's going on, and they are in fact on the verge of doubling the number of kids with the savings. The funds have actually expanded the number of youth served and increasing the savings. And the Sacramento County is now going to use the federal waiver, so they now have federal dollars that they can use as well to expand the program. And the results, the costs were reduced, more teens got permanent families, and the services paid for themselves after the startup period. So now every year when they put money in, they get the return on investment in the same fiscal year, in the very same fiscal year. So they put in dollars, and because they put in those dollars for these services, they end up saving more money that they put in. So it's not just budget neutral, it's budget positive for them. So they have more change in their pocket because they're doing these services. They pay attention to that. Okay, Jeff, would you want to talk about considerations for reinvestment?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, you want to go ahead and hit the next, there you go. When we talk about the amounts that are saved, as Gail showed earlier, from county, state, or both, depending on where you live and how your state is structured, we look at the savings to see where who's in control of that savings. Obviously, you need to talk to those folks if you're talking about reinvestment as to who's controlling the purse strings for that reinvestment. The other is that we talked about startup funds, venture capital kinds of things, and it really takes some time to get this going. In other words, you won't see a savings tomorrow, but you will in short order. It usually takes a year or two to ramp this up. You start seeing savings, and it's like building a funnel, if you will, where as the children achieve permanency, then you start to realize those savings. And that's where the venture capital concept comes in, where you're looking at the beginning of a process, ramping it up, and then eventually seeing a good return on that. And as Gail mentioned, the return is pretty significant.
So I'm going to take just a second and talk a little bit about where that startup money could come from. Mm-hmm. It can come from a government grant, for instance, Adoptions Opportunity and other things like that. We have been successful in getting foundations to invest in startup for some of our counties because they see that there is a return on investment. One of the things that we've pushed very heavily is that if they put out a request for proposal for this kind of thing, that they include that the expectation and the requirement that the county track and reinvest savings, or they can't have the money. And in fact, one proposal that we have up right now says that only people who make that commitment will be considered, and once they're funded, if they do not track and reinvest the savings, they will have to pay back the investment that the foundation made. And I think that's acting like a real venture capitalist, so that's something to think about in going forward. There's also in California, the state actually put state money in to fund 5 different counties to do this work because they believed that it would achieve savings to the state as well. This was back in 2007, and they did not require those programs to reinvest, and all of those programs closed down at the end. So if you're looking at doing something like that in your state, either with county money or federal or state money, or if you're a waiver state as well, federal waiver state, then you want to build into that the jurisdictions that get this startup funding must track and reinvest the savings. Otherwise, it's just like any other grant that you do it for a little while and then all of your investment it goes away. And then also leveraging the reinvestment by using EPSDT Medicaid for clinical components of the youth permanency work. Not all states are using EPSDT, and I'm going to explain what that is. EPSDT stands for Early Periodic Screening, Diagnosis, and Treatment. This is a federal entitlement for any youth under 21 who is eligible for Medicaid, and all of our kids are eligible. So many states don't use this, but it is a federal requirement. And California actually, a bunch of years ago, got sued by, I think, the Youth Law Center or something like that, National Center for Youth Law. Somebody sued them for not providing this benefit, and now EPSDT is used widely all over the state. It includes physical and mental health. It's an entitlement. It's there. It covers all children in foster care who show medical necessity, which is a diagnosis, and that's a whole range of diagnoses that are common in older youth. Depression, oppositional defiant, anxiety, PTSD, these are diagnoses that our kids have. So having this money makes a huge difference. Now, the reason that we use that in our program in California was because youth permanency work is primarily clinical in nature. You need to work with a young person to address their grief and loss, to address their trauma, to take a look at the various ways in which their mental health prevents them from being successful in a family. They don't want to be abandoned again. They don't want to be rejected again. They protect themselves by behaviors that come out of that fear of loss. So probably 80% of the work happens in a clinical nature, and EPSDT can pay for that. If we have time, we'll go into a little more about how EPSDT. Oops, sorry, folks. I didn't turn off that line. Okay, so I'm just going to go briefly onto this now. We have an appendix that you'll get when you pull up the slides that Mary will send out to you. But EPSDT works not just on the mental health part, is not just the 50-minute hour in the therapist's office. They also have what's called the rehab model, and this is individual or group rehabilitation is what they call it. And this is a service that includes but not limited to assisting in improving, maintaining, or restoring a child or group of children's functional skills. Now think about what our youth need. Daily living skills, social and leisure skills, grooming, personal hygiene, obtaining support resources, obtaining medication, education. Our kids don't actually know how to be in a family. That's a major issue that's in the way. So what you're looking at here, the result of the included diagnosis, the youth needs to have a significant impairment in an important area of life functioning. Which of our kids does not have a significant impairment in an important area of life functioning? They need to show either that or the probability of a significant deterioration in the area of life functioning if it's not addressed. Well, all of our kids are going downhill. They're facing really bad outcomes. And the probability that a child will not progress developmentally as individually appropriate. And we see what happens with these kids. They're having to move too often. They're not doing well in school. They're having to move from school to school before they actually finish the course, or they're not getting full credits. They're not graduating. All of that kind of stuff. So youth permanency is actually a mental health service, these specialized services, because it addresses and ameliorates these deficiencies that they have. So it's a really important thing to consider. Even more important is the fact that the share of cost is extremely low to the local jurisdiction. In many states, the counties do not pay any share of cost at all, any. And that's the way it was in California. And then we got so many people using it that the state said, okay, I know we have to pay for this, but we're not going to pay for it. We'll pay for it 100%, but any increased share of cost, any increased caseload, you have to pay 5%. So in California, the counties have been paying 5 cents on the dollar for these services. It's a huge, huge leverage. Okay, Jeff, do you want to talk about
Sure.
this one?
Yeah, I think, as we mentioned earlier, this is different from state to state in the U.S. and it's depends on your structure. But the point is, when you talk about reinvesting, it's a major challenge, and for me, this is probably one of the toughest things, and something that you shouldn't underestimate. So, working the numbers and doing the things we've talked about takes some work. But the real part is the personal relationships, as you might imagine, and the organizational issues about this. So many times in a jurisdiction, there's organizational silos, whether it's family services or behavioral health or any of those organizations that control this process and the funding of the process. The funding often happens from one department, and the work's being done in another. And so when you talk about tracking savings, the group doing the work cannot see financially the savings. It may happen in another organization, and maybe a third organization actually writes the checks to pay for it. So it's a very complex organizational issue.
And I want to throw in for a minute, when Jeff uses the term organization, he's coming from the corporate world, and it doesn't mean a separate company. It means a department inside the corporation. Point. So just to make sure that they understand, we're talking about departments here. Okay.
Anyway, those decision makers all have different agendas and different issues and different marching orders, if you will. And so it's the difficult part can be to get those organizations to collaborate and to work together on that. And there's ways to do that. So a little bit of early planning and figuring out who's in charge and where they get their directions from. And in California's case, it's the council members that are on the county council, and those folks really will give the direction to the departments. And so sometimes you have to go up, and as Gail mentioned, in the process of some of the programs that were done there, those folks were kept really in tune with this by showing them the personal vignettes of the children where the successes happened, doing a lot of communication to keep them current with the cost savings, that sort of thing. So when it comes time to say we really want to capture this savings and reinvest it back into those permanency services, then they're on board with that, and they can help direct those departments to do that. So I guess my point there is it's a very, that's the complex part that scares me the most when we do these things, because we can track numbers all day long, but you really have to get the heads of those departments together, look at the structure of where they get the directions from, and begin to work with people to help them understand and to support the reinvestment.
And it should be enough to say, wow, look how much money you're going to save. It should be a duh that this would happen, but it's not. And we've worked with jurisdictions around the country, and it's amazing how difficult it is. In Sacramento County, it ended up being really power politics, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. So and here's the examples in Sacramento. So the real dilemma. The savings were achieved by their Department of Family Services. They call it something else, but that's the easiest, DFS. But it reduced the costs in their Department of Human Assistance, because their Department of Human Assistance pays the check to the provider, and the Department of Family Services provide the services. So Department of Family Services is doing all this really good work with the partner, external partner, to do it, saving all kinds of money, but they save no money inside their budget that they could use to reinvest. It went to the Department of Human Assistance. But the funds not spent by the department, I had the wrong thing, that should be DHA. The funds not spent by the Department of Human Assistance revert back to the county general fund, so they can't even give it to us. So the Board of Supervisors controls the general fund. So where you got to go is the Board of Supervisors, and that's the hint. Always get above the fiscal silos. You've got departmental silos. They're worrying about taking care of their own work in there. Those silos go so high up they can't even see daylight out of them. But if you go to where the savings actually accrue, that's where you have your leverage. So here's what we did in Sacramento. If you go up to the box at the top center, number 1, it's their Department of Health and Human Services. They provided these youth permanency services. They did it with an external partner, but they were providing these services. They were making the referrals, making the decisions on permanency, all of the rest. Those youth then, if you go over to the left to number 2, those youth exited care to legal permanence, and as they did that, the Department of Human Assistance foster care costs went down. They saved the money there. Then what happened at 3, the Department of Human Assistance transferred funds to the Department of Behavioral Health to pay the 5% match for their EPSDT, Medi-Cal, we call it in California, Medicaid program. And then the Department of Behavioral Health at 4, they put in the 5%, and if you look at the arrow going down, and drew back state and federal funds of 100%. So they actually put in $20,000, and it returned $400,000. That's a huge, huge return on investment. So the Department of Behavioral Health leveraged the state and federal funds, partnered with the Department of Health and Human Services to create these youth permanency services. Now, the way this actually worked, and our funding, our federal funding, was sunsetting in 2008, which was not a pretty year. That was not a pretty fiscal year. Everything was going downhill fast. And we were able to say to the Board of Supervisors, if you do this, you're going to save a lot of money. But the departments were really, really scared about it. We worked hard with the board, and we got the trust of the board. So ultimately what happened was that the chair of the board said to the Director of Health and Human Services, are you going to address these issues? And they said, yes, we will, but we need some help. And so then the chair turned to the Director of the Human Assistance, Department of Human Assistance, who get the savings, and said, I want you to transfer $20,000 to the Department of Behavioral Health. You need to do that now. I direct you to do that. Said to the Department of Behavioral Health, I want you to do a request for proposals for this youth permanence mental health program. I want it done by this date, and I want a contract by this date. They then did that, and he said, and then you are to partner with the Department of Health and Human Services to make this work. It ended up being a political power thing that made it happen. And I'm just an ordinary child welfare advocate. I'm not, I don't give them big money for their campaigns or anything. They just saw the wisdom in it. And even though there was some kicking and screaming about doing it, they did it, and the program is doing so well, and it's continuing at no cost to the county, and there's no reason why it ever has to stop. It's going to continue, it's going to expand, it's going to grow, and the money, more and more kids will do it. So here's how we did it and the ways in which you can replicate. First of all, you need to document the savings. So it's a bit complex because you have to look at the federal share of cost, you have to look at the state and county share of cost, depending how you're organized. You have to look at all the different levels of care that you have for your kids and where they would come. You have to look at what percentage of your kids are federally eligible in foster care and what percentage are federally eligible in adoption and guardianship. And of course, all of our youth, all the kids age 6 and above are federally eligible for adoption subsidies now. You have to look at all of that. Mission Focused Solutions can help you with that if you need, or we actually have a savings calculation worksheet that we're happy to share with you if you want to give it a try yourself. If you want that, our contact information is on.
Oh, we lost you, Gail.
I keep bumping into this thing that hangs down, so feel free to contact us if you want help in doing that with the worksheet or whatever. Okay, so then, really important thing, establish relationships. It's really important that you include not just your members of the Board of Soups, and you want to build relationships well in advance and tell them stories about the kids, make them proud of the work that their county is doing, or if you're the county itself, that really brag on that. If you are a private agency coming in to help with this, or advocates, it's really critically important that you include the departments in the whole thinking. We worked with a state where a private agency did all of the number crunching and were stunned with how much money there was to be saved. They went to their state and got a huge funding initiative through to be able to do this work. They got lots of kids referred in and all the rest, but they never circled back during the process and included the Department of Social Services, whatever they call it in that state, in the whole process. And the department didn't buy in, and there were things that happened that caused the program basically to fail, even though there was all these dollars, because they went around the people that actually do the work. So relationships are critically important. You need to engage leaders at all levels, and we're talking about electeds, we're talking about department heads, we're also talking about those natural leaders inside any organization that may not have a lofty title, but they really do impact the way in which people view what's going on and whether private partners are good or private partners are bad, or all of that kind of thing really makes a huge difference. You need to publicize the program outcomes and the fiscal success. In the Destination Family Program in Sacramento, we did big celebrations where we brought all the players in and the stakeholders in and the media in and really celebrated it and made a big deal. In that particular case, there was an external partner, and so we made sure that we actively I'm good down to it, that we actually acknowledged the county and gave them all the credit wherever we could. But going back to the bullet just above it, actively participate in the county budgeting process. I was at every single budget hearing with Sacramento County for a number of years, even when critical programs were being cut. I would stand up there and congratulate them on doing such good work in their department, doing such good work that these kids were actually achieving permanent families. And over again, while everybody else was throwing tomatoes at the board for making cuts, we were saying congratulations, congratulations, even before they started reinvesting. And so they liked that. It was great. We gave them lots of credit. And then the importance of developing a network to advocate to the Board of Supervisors. The more stakeholders you can get to be coming to the board, including your youth, who are the most powerful advocates in California, to say, we need this, we deserve this, there's funding for it, please help us make it happen. And then, most of all, persevere. This is long, hard work. You have to get people to do things which, for whatever reason, is hidden in plain sight. And so working with them, establishing the relationship, building trust, and just plain never going away. It's proved huge here in California with our initial counties, more counties are buying in all of the time, and it's really, really critically important. So we're going to stop there right now so that we can take questions, and then when you get your packets, you're going to find some extra slides that go into more detail. We've got examples in different in different states of how the money shakes down, more detail about how EPSDT works, and such as that. But let's go in and see if there are any questions now. Kim, can you help us with that?
I sure can. First of all, I just want to thank you both. This was really fascinating. And I have to say, Gail, I've heard you talk about this so many times, but every time I'm just re-excited and re-energized and learn a little bit more. So
Good.
really thank you a lot. I know a couple of people have asked if this is being recorded, and yes, it is being recorded, and it will be available to anybody who would like to listen to it and look at the slides at the advocatesforfamiliesfirst.org website. And if you go under capacity building, you'll see webinars down there, and it will be one of, I think it's now our 7th webinar that we've hosted. There's a number of other ones there that you might find interesting and helpful in your work as well. One question, I know, Gail, that you had very generously said that folks can get in touch with you and with Jeff, and I'm sure you're going to be hearing from a lot of them. But one of the big questions everybody is wondering, myself included, so how can we figure out how to crunch the numbers and the cost for our own state or county?
Okay, we have a savings calculation worksheet which we're happy to share with you.
That would be great. And is that something that you have sent to Mary or can send to us to post right on the website along with your
No, I haven't, because I have a deal. I want to work with you. If you crunch the numbers, the numbers in your state, I want you to share them back with us so that we can have a database.
So people will get in touch with you directly, and that way you'll be able to do the follow-up. That sounds fair.
Right. That's right. And for organizations that are people that need help with that, Jeff and I can help with that. We do have to charge a fee for that because it's very time consuming, but we are available on a fee-for-service basis to do it for you.
Wonderful, thanks. And then another question I have for you that somebody asked, it sounded like you have been able to, at least in part, influence having the savings be reinvested in post-permanency work. Am I reading that correctly?
The Destination Family Youth Permanence Mental Health Program in Sacramento County includes follow-up with these families post-permanence with clinical services.
Okay, and do you have some recommendations for folks on how they can break through the silos in their own state to try to get that money, rather than being reinvested in fixing potholes, to be reinvested in, children and youth work?
Well, what worked for us was the shiny object that I had up front in the first slide, and that's the fact that there's big money to be saved. So the very first start is documenting the savings. Now, it's true that we're doing it because the kids should get families, but these are very concrete black and white savings because these kids aren't going to get it. There's other savings that we're not even showing. For instance, that the number of kids go down in care, then your actual child welfare costs go down as well, and your court costs and things like that. But all we're using here is the actual dollars that are paid to the provider, because we have wanted to take everything off the table that they could say, yeah, but.
Okay. Oh, that's great. That's really good information.
Can I make a comment on that? In just what Gail just said, is the numbers we use are the most conservative numbers we can do, and we do that kind of in every jurisdiction we look at, for that very reason of you want to take out a lot of the iffy kinds of things that you could debate. And so we're really conservative when we do this, and it always comes out positive. There's enough on the table that there's plenty of room, and so I think that's the part that captures people's interest. And then you just continue to work through all those questions, because it's too good to be true for a lot of people, and they want to constantly doubt it, and if you keep sticking to the basic numbers, it holds up really well, and eventually they get it.
And
When
I think that you
when
both had mentioned that you've been in other states as well.
Yes, we've done it for California, North Carolina, Kentucky, Minnesota, and Oregon.
Wonderful. And I guess one of the questions as an advocate that many of us are probably wondering is, what's that first step to get in the door to be heard?
The first step is having the shiny object to wave in their face, showing them where the savings are. That really is the first step, but it is not enough. It should be enough, but it is not enough.
Right. Well, it's really been fascinating. Are there any other last things that you wanted to share with folks?
I guess I would just say that it's fine to contact us about the savings calculation worksheet, and we also have a reinvestment roadmap, which I'll send to you, Kim, and you could post that as well, that talks about the steps that you need to go through in another kind of detail that we didn't refer to today. But this is really worth doing, and you need to be prepared that it's going to be more challenging than you'd expect. It's hard work to figure out all of those the savings, and when you go down, in fact, I'm going to quickly show you. Here's an example, Appendix A of the appendixes here. This is North Carolina savings, different levels of care: adoption from a state licensed home, a private agency home, a therapeutic home, a group home, guardianship from or reunification. There's a lot of complex stuff in here, so it's worth doing. And I want you all to know that I was not gifted with a strong left brain, and I figured this out. Later, I brought Jeff in, and he does it now. But it just took real perseverance to work it and work it and work it. So it is possible to do. I have a pretty strong left brain now, actually.
It's getting stronger all the time, I bet.
It is. So it's so worth doing. The way I feel is that we know how to find permanent families for our older youth. We have good practice out there. We've been doing it for over, 15 years or something.
Right.
So we know how to do that, and it can be done at no net cost to the jurisdiction. So I firmly believe we have a moral and fiscal imperative to do this.
And as I am looking at the figures that you have, these are numbers that are publicly available.
Absolutely.
Okay. I just want to double check on that. Well, I really want to thank you both, Gail and Jeff. This has been such a great opportunity for folks, and I can't tell you how much we at Advocates for Families First appreciate it. We're always looking for great models to share with people and want to build their skills. Thank you very much for the attendees who have been here and listening and active in their listening the whole time. I'm sure many, if not all of you, will be back in touch with Gail and Jeff for more information. As I said, you will get a link to the recorded version, and if you would like, you could send an email to me at kimstevens@nacac.org to get ongoing information from Advocates for Families First. We do have a couple of great webinars coming up. We're hoping on December 12th to have a webinar that discusses the implications and next steps regarding HR 4980, which was the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act that just passed. And we have a webinar coming up in February by Dr. Joseph Crumley on kinship care, both inside and outside of the formal system. So, be looking for that. I think that would be a great opportunity. And finally, if you could please complete the survey that you're going to get at the end of the session, we would greatly appreciate it. Hope everybody has a wonderful day and a good week moving forward. Take care.
Thank you all.